picture this. It's 11:15 p.m. on a Tuesday.
A very specific Tuesday.
Right, a very specific, very exhausting Tuesday. The apartment is totally silent because your 5-year-old is, finally asleep, and you are just utterly exhausted. Like your brain feels like a battery blinking at 1%.
Oh, I know that feeling. We all know that feeling.
Yeah, exactly. And yet, instead of sleeping, you're just staring at the artificial glow of your phone. You're scrolling through like page after page of online storefronts.
Doom scrolling, but with a credit card.
Exactly. You throw a $25 planner into your digital cart, then a set of organizing bins you don't really need.
Right.
Then maybe a cheap sweater.
Yeah.
And you hit buy now, and for about, 3 seconds, you feel a tiny sleeting rush of control.
It's a quick hit of dopamine.
Yeah. But then, almost immediately, the cortisol spikes. The dread just completely sets in.
Because you know the reality.
Right. Because mathematically, you know that money does not exist in your checking account. You just put another $75 onto a credit card that's like already sitting at a 24% interest rate.
It is a profound state of cognitive dissonance. I mean, the conscious brain completely knows the action is destructive.
Yeah.
But the exhausted, stressed brain just overrides it. It's desperate for any immediate relief from the chronic pressure of a financial shortfall.
And that exact scenario is basically the beating heart of our source material today. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are pulling a hyper-detailed case study from Nitschesons, specifically from their scenario series.
It's a fantastic series.
It really is. And the goal today is to understand the actual mechanical reality of the paycheck-to-paycheck trap. We're looking at a 32-year-old single mom in Ohio named Sarah.
Okay, so let's get into her specifics.
Yeah, so she's a full-time administrative assistant. She makes $38,000 a year. Her son, Ethan, is 5. And she is currently just suffocating under $9,200 of credit card debt.
That's a heavy burden.
It's crushing. The source text actually has this incredibly raw quote from her. She says she feels like she is failing her son every day.
Which is just a devastating articulation of a systemic problem. Financial stress rarely stays confined to a spreadsheet.
No, it bleeds into everything.
Right, it bleeds into your identity, your parenting, your self-worth. But what's really fascinating here is that the source doesn't treat Sarah's situation as, like, a moral failure.
Yes, thank you. It's so refreshing.
It treats it as an engineering problem. The whole goal is to extract a universal, mathematically sound budget recovery and debt reduction strategy from her specific crisis.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. Just listening to this, you likely already understand the basics of personal finance.
Right. You know what an interest rate is.
Exactly. You're supposed to spend less than you earn. But this feeling of financial suffocation that Sarah describes, the feeling of doing everything, quote unquote, right, working full time and still sinking, it's an epidemic.
It really is. It's everywhere.
So we aren't here to offer, platitudes today. We're going to look under the hood of a failing financial engine and basically map out a precise, step-by-step masterclass on how to rebuild it.
While it's still running down the highway, essentially.
Exactly. So to rebuild that engine, we first have to diagnose the exact nature of the failure.
And the failure here isn't a massive, catastrophic implosion. It's not bankruptcy from a single event. It's a slow, systemic bleed.
Right. We need to look at the anatomy of Sarah's financial squeeze. Let's start with the structural realities of her income and her fixed costs.
Let's do the math.
Okay, so Sarah grosses $38,000 a year. But after taxes and standard deductions, her actual monthly take-home pay is $2,400.
Okay, $2,400. That is her absolute ceiling for resource allocation.
Right. Now let's look at the floor. Her rent is $950 for a 2-bedroom apartment.
Which, honestly, in today's market is quite low.
Yeah, it really is. And before anyone shouts that she should, downsize to a studio, the source material explicitly addresses this.
It does. She needs that second bedroom for her growing son.
Exactly.
Right.
And crucially, this specific apartment keeps them in a reliable school district, and it's in proximity to her childcare infrastructure.
This is such a vital point about the rigidity of the modern economic landscape.
Oh, totally.
The old adage of, just move somewhere cheaper completely ignores the cascading costs of disrupting a carefully balanced logistical network.
Yes, moving might save her, $100 in rent?
Right, but it could cost her $200 in increased commuting costs, or she might lose her subsidized, reliable daycare.
And speaking of daycare, even with a state subsidy, childcare runs her $600 a month.
Wow. 600, and that's with a subsidy.
with a subsidy. That is a massive chunk of her take-home pay. But it's a non-negotiable prerequisite that allows her to work at all.
Exactly. She can't earn the 2,400 without spending the 600.
Right. So then we look at the other foundational columns. We've got $400 for groceries and household items, $200 for utilities, which, includes internet.
Which is essentially a required utility now. You can't function without it.
No, you really can't. Then she has transportation. A used 2017 Honda Civic with a $250 monthly payment,
Okay.
plus $100 for gas and $80 for insurance.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, we are looking at an absolute masterclass in structural fragility.
Well, it's totally up.
When you aggregate those foundational expenses, housing, childcare, food, basic utilities, and transportation to get to the job that pays for it all, you arrive at $2,580.
$2,580 against a take-home pay of $2,400.
Exactly. Which means her foundational survival costs exceed her take-home pay by $180.
Every single month.
Every month.
This just raises an important question about how we, define a financial crisis.
Right. We tend to think of a crisis as a medical emergency or a sudden job loss.
Yeah, a big dramatic event.
But Sarah's crisis is her baseline. Her resting state is a deficit.
A negative baseline.
Exactly. A $180 shortfall might seem minor in isolation, but a systemic recurring deficit is infinitely more dangerous than a one-time emergency.
Because it never stops.
Right. Because it means the system requires a constant influx of high-interest debt just to maintain stasis.
It's a terrifying way to live. I look at it like a pilot trying to fly a plane where the engines are burning slightly more fuel than the tanks can hold.
That's a great analogy.
You aren't crashing immediately,
Yeah.
right? But the altitude is slowly, mathematically guaranteed to drop until you hit the ground.
Because a negative baseline means you have absolutely zero margin for error.
None. You can't absorb a pothole, a medical copay, or a growth spurt that requires new shoes for your kid.
And that inevitability brings us to the coping mechanisms.
Right. The human element.
Exactly. When the math doesn't work, human behavior steps in to bridge the gap. We have to look at how that $180 systemic shortfall has actually metastasized into $9,200 of high-interest credit card debt.
Let's get into the specifics of that debt. The source breaks it down across two cards. Card 1 carries a balance of $5,000 at a staggering 24% interest rate.
24%, ouch.
Yeah. And Card 2 holds $4,200 at 19%. Her minimum monthly obligations on these, just to keep the accounts from going into default, sit at $250.
Which, ironically, pushes her actual monthly deficit well beyond the initial $180.
Right. The debt itself becomes a new fixed expense.
Accelerating the sink rate. And we see how this plays out in real time in the case study. The source notes a recent $300 car repair.
Yeah. And because her baseline is negative, she obviously has no cash reserves.
None. So that repair went straight onto the 24% card.
Just piling it on. But here is where it gets really interesting and where the behavioral economics come into play.
The psychology of it all.
Exactly. It's not just the unavoidable car repairs driving the debt. It's the 11 p.m. Amazon scrolling we talked about at the very beginning.
Right. The coping mechanism.
The source explicitly tracks $100 to $150 a month, bleeding out to random, unused items.
Planners, cheap gadgets.
Fast fashion, stuff she doesn't even use. She is directly quoted as saying she is buying happiness, but it doesn't even work.
We have to really analyze the vicious loop driving that behavior because the cycle is deeply physiological.
Break that down for us.
Well, the persistent structural deficit creates chronic stress.
I'm worrying there about money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And chronic stress floods your system with cortisol, which leads to emotional and cognitive exhaustion.
You're just drained.
Completely drained. And when the brain is exhausted, it actively seeks out dopamine, a chemical reward, to counteract the distress.
So it's looking for a quick fix.
Yes. Clicking buy on a $20 planner provides a microdose of control and pleasure. It is literally a biological survival mechanism, but it's being misapplied to a digital consumer environment.
Wow. It's basically self-medicating with the exact toxin that caused the illness in the first place.
That's exactly what it is.
But I want to push back here because I know what a lot of people are thinking when they hear this.
Sure.
If she is mathematically underwater and she explicitly knows the planners aren't bringing her happiness, why doesn't she just stop?
The willpower argument.
Right. I mean, we all have to do things we don't want to do. Why can't she just exercise some willpower, delete the app, and stop spending that $150?
That assumption relies on a fundamental misunderstanding of how willpower actually functions.
How so?
Willpower is not a character trait. It is a finite cognitive resource. It is subject to what psychologists actually call ego depletion.
Ego depletion, okay.
Think of willpower like a muscle. By the time Sarah has navigated a full day of demanding administrative work, picked up an exhausted 5-year-old from daycare.
Cook dinner, manage bedtime.
Exactly. And worried about an impending electric bill. By the time she does all that, that muscle is completely fatigued.
It's torn to shreds.
Right. You cannot rely on a depleted cognitive resource to make complex, future-oriented financial decisions late at night.
That makes so much sense.
Telling someone in that state to just use willpower is like telling a marathon runner to just sprint the last mile. The physiological capacity simply isn't there.
So relying on discipline is basically a losing strategy when the system itself is designed to exhaust you.
Absolutely.
That completely reframes the approach.
Yeah.
If willpower is off the table, you have to bypass the exhausted brain entirely.
Precisely. You must engineer an environment where the default action is the financially responsible action. You have to introduce structural friction.
Structural friction, I like that.
And that is exactly where the source material pivots from diagnosis to the actual recovery strategy.
All right, let's get into the mechanics of that recovery. The source outlines a multi-layered masterclass, and the immediate priority, the triage phase essentially, is stopping the bleed.
Right. If the boat has a hole, you don't start bailing water until you patch the leak.
Exactly. So week 1 is entirely dedicated to hunting down and neutralizing that $180 shortfall to reach a break-even point.
The first directive here is rigorous tracking.
Tracking every single penny.
Yes. Using an app or even just a simple notebook to monitor every transaction for 30 days. Because you can't fix a leak if you don't know exactly where the water is escaping.
And the source gives very specific mathematical targets to neutralize that $180 deficit. First, cut the $100 emotional spending binge.
But crucially, based on what we just discussed about ego depletion, you don't just cut it and leave a void.
Right, because that leads to a relapse.
Exactly, you replace it. The source suggests substituting the dopamine hit of a purchase with free stress relievers.
Like,
Calling a friend or creating a movie night ritual with library DVDs. You have to give the brain an alternative off-ramp.
the substitution is critical for sustainability.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's $100. The second target is trimming $50 from the $400 grocery budget.
Now, this isn't about extreme couponing.
No, nobody has time for that.
Right. It's about structural efficiency, meal planning, buying non-perishables in bulk, and organizing meals around sales cycles rather than, impulse cravings.
Okay, so that's $150 recovered, and the final $30 comes from optimizing utilities.
Right. Unplugging phantom power drains, maybe adjusting the thermostat a few degrees.
So math-wise, the 100 from the binges, 50 from groceries, and 30 from utilities exactly covers the $180 shortfall.
The budget is balanced.
The budget is balanced.
Right.
But my absolute favorite part of this initial phase is the physical action required.
Freezing the credit cards.
Yes, literally submerging them in a container of water and putting them in the back of the freezer.
That is the ultimate example of structural friction. It directly addresses the willpower deficit we talked about.
Because you literally can't get to them.
Right. If the credit card is encased in a block of ice, you physically cannot use it for a late-night impulse purchase on your phone.
You'd have to thaw it out first.
Exactly. And the time it takes for that ice to melt acts as a mandatory, insurmountable cooling off period.
Our forced patience.
It forces the prefrontal cortex, the logical planning part of the brain, to re-engage before the transaction can be completed.
It's like installing a breathalyzer on a car. You're locking yourself out of your own worst impulses when you know you won't be in the right state of mind to make a good decision.
Yes. And with that, the bleeding has stopped. She is no longer sinking.
Which is huge.
It is. But breaking even is just triage. The system is still incredibly fragile at this point.
Because she has zero margin.
Right. At a net zero baseline, the very next unexpected expense, a flat tire, a forgotten school fee, will shatter the equilibrium and send her right back to the ice block with a hammer.
Which brings us to the next vital phase, building the buffer. The source outlines a sprint to build a $500 mini emergency fund over the first 3 months.
So she's no longer in the red.
Right. Now that she has stopped the bleeding, she takes that $180 she recovered and redirects it. The plan suggests automating $100 a month into a high-yield savings account.
Okay.
And to accelerate hitting that $500 target, she also sells unused items. Maybe the baby gear Ethan has outgrown or, those very unused planners.
Get them on local marketplaces.
Yeah, Facebook
Yeah.
Marketplace or whatever, to generate a quick $200.
We really need to analyze the specific mathematical and psychological weight of that $500 target.
So,
Because in the context of $9,200 of high-interest debt, saving $500 in a savings account seems totally counterintuitive.
right, if I'm paying 24% interest, holding $500 in an account earning maybe 4% feels like I'm actively losing money. Why not just attack the debt immediately?
I get that question all the time. But without a liquid buffer, any attempt at debt reduction is just an illusion.
The illusion, wow.
$500 is the statistical threshold to cover the vast majority of minor localized emergencies. An alternator repair, a plumbing issue, an urgent care copay.
Stuff that always pops up.
Exactly. If you lack that buffer, the moment friction occurs, you are forced to re-engage with high-interest credit.
You have to swipe the card again.
Right. And psychologically, the moment you put a new charge on a card you've been working so hard to pay down, demoralization completely sets in. The cycle restarts.
You feel like a failure all over again.
Yes. So the $500 fund is not an investment. It is an insurance policy against your own debt cycle.
That's a great way to put it.
It transforms Sarah from a reactive participant constantly putting out fires into a proactive manager of her finances.
It is the firewall that protects the entire strategy.
Exactly.
Okay, so the bleeding is stopped, the budget is balanced, the $500 firewall is fully funded and sitting in a high-yield account. The cards are frozen solid.
She's ready.
Now, we arrive at the absolute core of today's deep dive, the primary mission, the debt annihilation strategy.
This is where we transition from defensive maneuvers to a highly aggressive, mathematically optimized offensive.
I love this part.
For the next 24 months, the strategy relies entirely on the avalanche method.
I want to spend a lot of time here, actually, because there is an ongoing debate in the personal finance world between the avalanche method and the snowball method.
Yes, the classic debate.
And the source makes a very definitive stance. Let's look at the board again. Card 1, $5,000 at 24%. Minimum payment of $150.
Okay.
Card 2, $4,200 at 19%. Minimum payment of $100.
Right. Now, under the popular snowball method, you target the smallest balance first to get a quick psychological victory.
Which would be card 2.
Exactly. If Sarah chose that route, she would attack the $4,200 balance on card 2.
Which feels good because you clear a card faster.
It feels great. But the problem with this approach in a high-interest environment is that while she celebrates small wins on card 2, the $5,000 monster on card 1 is actively compounding at 24%.
It's growing faster than she can bail the water out.
Exactly. The psychological win of the snowball is completely offset by the mathematical devastation of that 24% APR.
Right.
We have to deconstruct the invisible thief of compound interest here. A 24% annual percentage rate means that every single day, a fraction of that interest is calculated and added to the principal.
Every day.
Every single day. By ignoring that card, she is essentially subsidizing the credit card company's profit margins with her own future labor.
That's brutal.
It is. The avalanche method operates on pure, ruthless efficiency. You ignore the balances entirely, and you strictly target the highest interest rate.
Even if it's the biggest balance.
Especially if it's the biggest balance.
Yeah.
You pay the minimums on everything else and pour every spare drop of capital onto the highest rate.
So the math looks like this. The $500 emergency fund is full. That $100 a month she was using to build it is now freed up.
Right.
She redirects that $100 directly at card 1. Her new payment on the 24% card is the $150 minimum plus the $100 extra.
She is now hitting that card with $250 a month.
And this is where the amortization curve really begins to bend, right?
Oh, absolutely. Paying $250 a month against a $5,000 balance at 24% means card 1 will be completely eliminated in 24 months.
2 years.
2 years of focused effort.
And once that happens, we execute the pivot that makes the avalanche so powerful.
Yes, the rollover. This is
Okay.
crucial. Once card 1 hits 0, she doesn't absorb that $250 back into her lifestyle.
She doesn't suddenly start spending it on dinners out.
No. She maintains the exact same level of financial output, but aims it at the next target. She takes the entire $250 and rolls it over onto card 2.
So for card 2, she was already paying her $100 minimum.
Right.
Now she adds the freed up $250. Suddenly, she is attacking card 2 with $350 a month.
The acceleration is staggering at this point.
It's a huge payment for a smaller balance.
Exactly. At $350 a month, attacking the remaining balance on card 2, which, remember, has been slowly decreasing over the last 2 years just from minimum payments, it only takes 18 months to clear it completely.
18 months. Wow. So 24 months for the first card, 18 months for the second. Total time to become completely 100% debt-free is 3.5 years.
42 months.
42 months to freedom.
And we must account for boosters, too.
Boosters?
Yes. The source notes that this timeline can be significantly compressed through windfalls.
Like a tax refund.
A tax refund, an annual bonus, or even picking up a highly localized side job, like babysitting for $50 a month.
Right.
If she aims every cent of those windfalls at the principal, that 42-month timeline shrinks rapidly. $600 extra a year from occasional babysitting might shave months off the back end of the loan.
Because it prevents that principal from compounding.
Exactly. It kills the interest before it can grow.
But I have to play the skeptic again here.
Go for it.
42 months. 3.5 years of relentless discipline. That sounds like an absolute eternity when you're starting from a place of deep exhaustion.
It does sound daunting.
We already established that her willpower is depleted just getting through a normal Tuesday. How do you keep a human being motivated for 3.5 years of grinding austerity? A spreadsheet doesn't care about fatigue, but a person definitely does.
This is a vital point of failure for many debt reduction plans. And it's where understanding the actual mechanics of the loan provides its own psychological fuel.
Tell me more about that.
We have to look at how minimum payments weaponize math against you and how extra payments weaponize math in your favor.
Explain that. How does the payment change over time?
Well, when Sarah makes a minimum payment of $150 on that high-interest card, a massive percentage of that payment, sometimes over $100 of it, goes entirely to servicing the interest generated that month.
It doesn't even touch the actual debt.
Exactly. Only a tiny fraction touches the principal. You are handing over your hard-earned money, and the balance barely moves. That is the definition of demoralizing.
It's like shoveling snow while it's still blizzarding.
Right. But when she introduces that extra $100, that extra money bypasses the interest completely.
Wait, really?
Yes, the minimum payment covers the interest. The extra 100 strikes the principal with 100% efficiency.
So the extra money is infinitely more powerful than the minimum payment money.
Exactly. And here is the true magic. Every single dollar of principal she vaporizes this month permanently reduces the total amount of interest that can be generated next month.
Because the interest is calculated on a smaller remaining balance?
Right. So in month 1, her $250 payment might be split with a large chunk going to interest, but in month 2, because the principal is smaller, less interest generates.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Therefore, a larger percentage of her $250 payment goes toward the principal. Month by month, the portion of her payment eaten by interest shrinks, and the portion annihilating the principal grows.
Her payment basically hits harder and harder every single month without her having to spend an extra dime.
The efficiency of the payment increases automatically.
Yes.
The progress accelerates exponentially. And once you visualize that acceleration, once you see the balance dropping faster this month than it did last month, it becomes highly motivating.
You're actually seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
Exactly. You aren't just slogging. You are watching the tide turn mathematically in your favor.
That is incredibly satisfying. But even with the math working in her favor, sustaining this for 3.5 years means she can't just rely on spreadsheets and austerity.
No, she can't.
She has to structurally heal her relationship with money, and frankly, she needs more money. You can only cut expenses so far before you hit bone.
Yes.
Which brings us to the next critical phase, behavioral shifts and the income engine.
We have to address the sustainability of the system. Frugality has a floor. You cannot out-budget an insufficient income. And extreme deprivation is a guaranteed catalyst for relapse.
Right. So the source outlines a fascinating ongoing behavioral shift to handle the emotional side of this marathon. First, it requires actively tracking stress triggers.
Awareness is key here.
Exactly. Noticing the specific environments or interactions, like a difficult shift at work or a tense conversation with her ex, that precipitate the urge to spend.
Once identified, she can deploy those free alternative coping mechanisms we discussed, like single mom support networks.
Yeah. But the truly brilliant piece of advice here, the thing that ensures she doesn't just snap, is the implementation of a guilt-free fund budget.
We need to analyze the genius of this specific pressure valve. Once the $500 emergency fund is established, the plan mandates allocating $20 a month purely for guilt-free spending.
$20 doesn't sound like much, but mathematically, it's the difference between success and failure.
It is deeply strategic. You see the exact same dynamic in restrictive dieting.
Oh, for sure.
If you tell someone they can never consume sugar again, their brain will eventually rebel against the absolute deprivation, usually resulting in a massive binge.
Right. You eat an entire cake at 2 a.m.
Exactly. The same is true for behavioral finance. If Sarah tells herself she cannot buy a single non-essential item for 42 months, the psychological pressure will build until she ends up on a $500 Amazon binge at 2 a.m.
Destroying months of progress.
Yes. So the $20 isn't a lapse in discipline, it is the mechanism that preserves the discipline.
It acts as a controlled release valve. Whether she buys, like a specialty coffee, a paperback book, or saves it for 3 months to buy a nice sweater, that absolute permission to spend without guilt ensures the broader budget remains psychologically sustainable.
It releases the steam so the engine doesn't explode.
I love that. And speaking of the engine, let's look at the income side of the equation.
The other half of the battle.
Right. The source is very clear. A $38,000 salary is too tight for a single-income household with a child in the current macroeconomic environment. The margins are just too thin.
They really are. We have to increase the capacity of the system.
So the source maps out 3 distinct paths to increase income during months 6 through 12.
The 3 avenues presented are negotiating a raise, initiating a side hustle, and aggressive upskilling.
Let's break these down. First, the raise. She has been at the construction firm for 3 years. The target is a 5% increase.
Which is reasonable after 3 years.
Very reasonable. That translates to an extra $1,900 annually, which works out to roughly $120 a month in extra take-home pay.
That's a solid bump.
Yeah. Path 2 is the side hustle. If the raise is denied, or even if it's granted and she wants to accelerate further, she looks for asynchronous part-time work.
Virtual administrative tasks, remote data entry.
Things she can do for 5 hours a week while Ethan is asleep. At $15 an hour, 5 hours a week yields $300 a month.
That's a huge injection of cash. And path 3 is upskilling, leveraging free or highly subsidized platforms like Coursera to acquire a credentialed skill.
Specifically bookkeeping, the source mentions.
Yes. The source projects that a dedicated 12-month study track could qualify her for a new position with a starting salary of $45,000.
So if we compare Path 2 and Path 3, the data entry side hustle versus studying bookkeeping, how should she prioritize her limited time? I mean, she only has those 5 hours a week when the house is quiet.
This requires an analysis of the return on investment of her time, comparing tactical gains versus strategic gains.
Okay, tactical versus strategic.
A side hustle at $15 an hour is a highly effective tactical move. It instantly solves today's cash flow problem.
Right, it gives you cash right now.
It provides immediate, tangible fuel to pour onto the debt avalanche. But it is inherently linear and low leverage. It requires continuous ongoing labor.
The moment she stops typing data, the money stops flowing.
Exactly. It is a second job, not a career advancement.
It's running on a treadmill. You have to keep moving to power it.
Exactly. Upskilling, however, is a strategic high-leverage move. Spending those same 5 hours studying bookkeeping yields zero immediate financial return.
Right, she gets no cash today for studying.
It does nothing to pay down the 24% credit card today. But acquiring that certificate fundamentally alters her market value.
Bumping her baseline salary from $38,000 to $45,000 permanently raises her financial floor.
Yes. It changes the trajectory of her earning potential without requiring her to prominently work 60 hours a week.
Here is how I basically conceptualize it. The budget cuts, the meal planning, the tracking, that is all about trimming the sails of a boat. It makes you incredibly efficient with the wind you currently have.
That's a great metaphor.
But the income increase, the upskilling, that is upgrading the engine. You can only trim the sails so much before you are at the mercy of the weather.
True.
To truly cross the ocean, to guarantee you can navigate storms, you need a bigger, more powerful engine. You need both efficiency and power to survive the journey.
That analogy perfectly encapsulates the dual nature of financial recovery. You cannot outbudget a fundamentally restricted income forever. At some point, the capacity of the engine must grow.
So let's look at the horizon. Let's fast forward.
Yeah.
What happens when the sails are trimmed, the engine is upgraded, the debt is completely annihilated, and Sarah finally has actual room to breathe?
The promised land.
Exactly. Which brings us to the final phase, the long-term vision.
This covers years 2 through 5. This is the profound transition from a defensive posture of survival to an offensive posture of wealth accumulation.
And the source outlines this beautiful cascading progression of capital allocation. First, once that final credit card payment is made, she has $350 a month of suddenly freed up cash flow.
Yes. And the key is she doesn't inflate her lifestyle.
She doesn't go buy a new car.
No. She redirects that entire amount to upgrade her mini emergency fund into a fully funded 3-month safety net. The target is $7,500.
Let's just pause and notice the radical shift in systemic capacity here.
It's night and day.
When we began this analysis, finding a spare $100 a month required meticulous auditing, cutting groceries, and freezing credit cards. It was a monumental struggle.
Right.
Now, simply because the drag of the high-interest debt has been eliminated, she is capable of saving $350 a month relatively painlessly.
It's the exact same money, but the efficiency of the system has been drastically optimized.
And once that $7,500 fortress is built, the horizon expands again. She begins retirement savings, opening a Roth IRA with $50 a month and maximizing any employer 401k match.
She starts funding Ethan's future with a $529 college plan at $25 a month.
And my absolute favorite part, she establishes a dream fund, $20 a month, earmarked exclusively for a future vacation, which compounds into a $1,200 trip in 5 years.
We really need to discuss the compounding effect of time here, not just mathematically, but psychologically.
How so?
A listener might look at a Roth IRA contribution of $50 a month at age 35 and think, what is the point? That is barely going to make a dent in retirement.
Right, $50 feels like a drop in the bucket.
But what is happening here is the establishment of the habit of wealth building.
You're building the infrastructure.
Yes, you are laying the track. Once the track is built, as her income continues to grow, especially with that new $45,000 bookkeeping position, she can scale the contributions up seamlessly.
But you must build the track before you can run the train.
Precisely.
It's a massive fundamental shift in her identity. She is moving from, how do I survive until the end of this week, which is a completely reactive state of panic, to where are Ethan and I going to travel in 5 years, which is an entirely proactive, visionary state.
The cognitive horizon expands. When you are trapped in the paycheck-to-paycheck cycle, your time horizon shrinks violently. You can only see as far as Friday.
Yeah, you're just trying to make it to payday.
As you eliminate debt and build a buffer, your time horizon expands to months, then years, then decades.
But I know what the cynical part of the brain is saying right now. I'm going to ask the question that always hangs over these personal finance case studies.
Hit me.
Is it really that simple? Just follow this perfectly laid out roadmap, use the avalanche method, get a certificate, and you're magically cured. It sounds so clinical and clean on paper, but human lives are messy.
Well, it is mathematically very simple. It is behaviorally excruciating. And that is the paradox at the heart of all personal finance. The math of improving your physical health is simple. Consume nutrient-dense foods and expend more energy than you take in.
But we all know how hard that actually is.
Exactly. The behavior required to do that consistently in a modern environment is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
This financial recovery plan requires unrelenting consistency over years.
Years of saying no.
Yes. It requires enduring the discomfort of saying no when every instinct is screaming to say yes to temporary relief. It requires studying the principles of bookkeeping when you are bone-tired. It is simple, but it is not easy.
And that is exactly why the source provides a closing mechanism designed to ground the abstract theory into daily reality. They provide a weekly action checklist.
Which is brilliant.
It's designed to take a massive, intimidating 5-year vision and compress it into a manageable, highly actionable 7-day sprint.
You cannot focus on year 4 when you are drowning in week 1. You have to shrink the focus to the immediate next step.
So let's look at this checklist for you, the listener, right now. It consists of 5 highly specific actions. Number 1, track your spending. Dedicate 5 minutes at the end of the day to review your transactions.
5 minutes. Totally doable.
Number 2, identify and cut your specific shortfall today. Look for the leaks, the subscriptions, the unused apps, the impulse buys.
Plug the holes.
Number 3, introduce structural friction. Freeze the cards. Delete the saved payment information from your browser. Make it hard to spend.
Don't rely on willpower.
Number 4, generate immediate capital. Find one item in your home you do not use and list it for sale by Sunday.
Everyone has something they can sell.
And number 5, replace the dopamine. Try one free stress-relieving activity this week that does not involve a screen or a transaction.
Those actions ground the grand strategy into immediate, concrete reality.
Yeah.
You cannot control macroeconomic inflation. You cannot control what emergencies might happen in year 3. But you retain absolute control over whether you put your credit card in a block of ice tonight.
Okay, let's take a collective breath and review the absolute magnitude of the journey we've mapped out today. We started in a place of deep anxiety, looking at Sarah and perhaps reflecting on our own lives, trapped in a systemic $180 monthly deficit, suffocating under $9,200 of predatory 24% debt.
It's a dark place to start.
It really is. But we mapped out how to bypass depleted willpower by stopping the bleeding through structural friction. We built a $500 firewall to protect the system.
We unleashed a mathematically optimized avalanche strategy to claw back the thousands of dollars being lost to interest.
We discussed the necessity of upgrading the income engine through strategic upskilling. And we looked at the promised land, the establishment of a $7,500 safety net, generational investments, and a reclaimed future.
It is a profound systemic transformation. It is the journey from a state of constant, low-grade physiological panic to a state of systemic resilience and proactive, autonomous planning.
It is entirely possible. But as we wrap up, I want to circle all the way back to the beginning, to the dark, quiet apartment at 11:15 p.m. and the murky waters of human psychology. We talked about Sarah's realization that she was buying happiness, but it doesn't even work.
It is the most vital realization a person can make in this process.
It leaves me with a lingering, provocative question for you, the listener, to carry with you as you look at your own accounts. If we are constantly trying to buy temporary emotional relief with money we do not actually possess, simply to cope with the chronic stress of not having money. Oh wait, let me rephrase that. Simply to cope with the chronic stress of not having money, what is the true hidden cost of our financial comfort habits?
That's the real question.
Are the quick fixes, the late-night purchases, the convenient takeout, the little hits of dopamine, actually the very walls of the prison keeping you trapped in the cycle?
That is the ultimate reflection. The true cost of a financially destructive habit is never just the price tag on the receipt. It is the compounding future that the habit steals from you.
Don't let your present stress steal your future freedom. Look at the checklist. Pick just one thing and do it today. Until next time, keep diving deep.